Justin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's get into, first of all, what I like to do is do the state of the state, just kind of a brief overview of what's happening today, and then we'll get into the background.
Well, my name's Justin Francis. I'm located in Nashville, Tennessee. Yeah, I'm in my home studio right now, which is about a half hour outside of Nashville. We're in Ashland City, kind of a cabin in the woods type scenario. We moved out here 6 or 7 years ago and just been loving it. Most of my work is engineering, mixing, but try to produce as many records as I can per year around that. Yeah, just trying to stay busy.
Just trying to stay alive.
100%.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the background a little bit. If I'm to understand correctly, you were raised in Western Pennsylvania outside of Pittsburgh. Is that right?
That's right. Suburbs outside of Pittsburgh. Grew up there, moved out when I was 17, 4 days after I graduated high school or something. So I've kind of come to know, the city of Pittsburgh as an adult, as a visitor,
Were your parents musical, or were they encouraging of music?
My parents are music fans. They would say they're big music fans. I would say they're casual music fans. The radio was always on. You would never catch them listening to a B-side of too much, but the radio was always on, or some kind of, country music television or something was on, in the background making dinner or something. So, it was a music appreciating household, but not nobody played any instruments, or I was kind of the black sheep.
And you began playing in bands around 13, is that right?
Yeah. I mean, early junior high, started playing in, punk rock, indie rock bands, that there was a lot of that type of music in Pittsburgh and suburbs around Pittsburgh. So kind of fell into that crowd, started skating, and, learned so much music, and my kind of taste opened wide up with all the skate videos we would watch. That was like my education on punk rock and classic rock, and how I got to appreciate a lot of that stuff.
When did you start noticing credits on records, or pay attention to the concept of production and audio, and what was the process there?
Probably the Beatles. I mean, the Beatles were big in my household growing up. And just the George Martin's name, is just almost as big as everybody else's, on Beatles records. So I guess that was probably the first time. But we went, kind of the condensed version is we went to record some stuff, with my young band, and with a guy that was a couple years older than we were, and he had an older brother that had gone to a Full Sail or something of the like, and had come home to Pittsburgh and kind of taught his little brother some stuff, and they opened like a little studio in, mom's basement / garage, and we went over there to record, and I kind of changed teams, and, never looked back. So, I mean, it's almost like my introduction to credentials and stuff was me being a part of the credentials. It's like I didn't really have a huge interest on, who is doing this or who is doing that yet. I was just kind of thrown into it first, and then I was like, oh, okay, cool. I can attach myself to all these cool pieces of music and all these cool bands, and I don't have to do too much work. So I thought.
Did that have a big impact on you, seeing what they were doing?
Oh yeah, 100%. And it wasn't anything to speak of too much, but it was a very early version of Pro Tools. It was digital recording. I just fell in love with the idea that I could help in some way, and I could facilitate something, but it didn't feel like all of the responsibility was completely on me to come up with something and perform something, and all the hassles that come along with being in a band and playing music kind of went away whenever it was like, oh, now I can just appreciate what you're doing and attach myself to it.
What was your primary instrument then?
I was playing guitar and singing in that band.
Did you play in school band at all?
Nope. it was, punk rock bands. And so I guess we maybe just went the other direction and decided against a formal route.
So did you find yourself getting involved with this studio?
100%. Yeah. Like I said, I kind of never left after that. Me and this guy, Chris, kind of struck up a friendship. And like I said, he was a couple years older than me. So I think he probably had his license at the time, so we would mow lawns and do yard work and stuff for people, $100 here, $100 there, and buy a new microphone. And we were making our own microphone cables. He showed me how to solder and how to make different types of cables. And we were just trying to build this studio up that had zero overhead. We were in mom and dad's basement and garage. So, you can start to chip away at some stuff pretty quick. And we were recording a lot of bands. I think, at one time I added it up and it was over 200 bands from, the time I met him when I was, 13, through the end of high school when I moved out.
What an intensive, jump into the pool and just get swimming, so to speak.
100%. I'm one of those people that's so fortunate that there was no other choice or there was no other job. Of course I've had jobs throughout the rest of high school and stuff just for extra pocket money, but there was never a choice of what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I was kind of hooked from the get.
Did your parents have designs on you doing something different?
Not necessarily doing something different. I think they're very supportive. The backup plan conversation definitely came up several times, but the idea that I had proposed was at the end of high school, going to a trade school, a technical school, and it was only going to be 8 or 9 months. So it's like, let me give this a shot and see what happens with it. And they were totally supportive about that.
Now you ended up moving to Phoenix, Arizona, and did you go to Crass?
That's right.
Tell me about that experience and what was your takeaway from going there?
Crass was great. I had a great experience there. It was 2007 or 2008 that I was there. They had 2 campuses, some Neotechs, I think maybe a couple Neve VRs and maybe SSL 4000s or 9000s at the time. And it was great. I'd never spent any time on a large format console. I'd never dug into textbook definitions of what polarity was or what any of these terms that, were tossed around or I would see on a screen, on a plug-in screen, but you just never, you never knew the technical definition or actually how things were working. So it was a great foundational education, even though I had been, recording bands for several years at that point. It was a great kind of, okay, well, here's kind of from the ground up a bit of an education on how this all really works or how to optimize what you're actually doing.
Every time I talk to somebody who graduated from Crass, seems the placement thing works out really well in terms of, once you graduate. Were they instrumental in helping you when you moved to, I think you moved to Nashville after that, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
At Soundstage Studios?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they were, it was part of the curriculum that you didn't graduate until you received a certain amount of hours, of school credits. So they were, totally great at hooking me up with a studio. And I had kind of known about this particular studio. There was a family trip that we had made to Nashville years earlier that we had actually, a friend of ours was making a record, friend of the family, and came down. We did some haze and hoes and claps on the record, whatever. So that was the first real studio that I'd been in, and really the only one that I knew about, in Nashville. So that's where I kind of set my internship coordinator towards. I was like, I'd like to try to get into this spot, and they facilitated it. And of course, the engineer that we worked with never knew that I had been there years earlier. I'd spent a lot of time with that guy, and it never came up.
So your internship, it turned into a long-term thing, right?
Yeah, I was there, I think technically you've got to be receiving some kind of school credit legally in Tennessee to do an internship. So I was, completed my school credit, and then, they started hiring me on occasionally as a very, very freelance, very, very sporadically. I would cover for the nighttime watchman if they had something to do or had a session or whatever. I would have the keys, and there were 3 main tracking rooms, and I would lock up at night, wait for everybody to leave, and I would lock up at night, make sure it was clean, and do that. And I did that for years, and I was holding down a job at a Radio Shack at a mall outside of town. But every week, while I was working at Radio Shack, I would look at my hours per week, and maybe I was working 32 hours this week at Radio Shack. I would try to be 33 at the studio, just be there and be present and be available, and devote your time to what you want to devote your time to.
So you were surviving because of Radio Shack. I do miss Radio Shack.
Oh yeah, it was. When I was there, it was a little bit. They were kind of dwindling out of the component section and diving more into cell phones, and it was going downhill quick.
Oh, yeah, I have fond memories of Radio Shack. Not working there, but going there. Here you are. You're from Pennsylvania. You go over to Arizona, then over to Nashville. In terms of culture and people, did you have any takeaways from that?
The reason I picked Nashville was because it was kind of the closest thing to Pittsburgh. As far as recording cities, LA, New York, Nashville, Miami, Atlanta, Nashville was kind of the closest thing. Not only, distance-wise was closer than LA. The cost of living was a lot closer to Pittsburgh than, going to New York or going to LA. I was with a girlfriend at the time. It was just a little bit closer in distance to Pittsburgh. She was also from Pittsburgh. So yeah, the size of the city, the kind of style of the city was, I took it to be kind of the closest thing to home. And that was kind of a bigger part of my decision.
You kind of came of age in some respects at Soundstage. Would you agree with that?
100%.
Tell me about your time there. Were there any mentors there that really had an impact on you?
Sure. I mean, this was a commercial facility that had been there, since the 60s, and was, kind of one of the premier independently owned but large commercial studios in Nashville on Music Row. And when I got there, it's like you had guys like Chuck Ainlay and Reed Shippen and Steve Marcantonio and Julian King and David Thoner, and there was a mastering facility upstairs, and there was just a lot of big records had been done in there, records that I'd heard of, records that I grew up listening to even. So yeah, I mean, I tried to soak up as much as I could from any and all of them.
We have a visitor.
Doggy. Hey, doggy. I thought you would come in here. Have a bone on me.
I tried to soak up as much as I could from any of those folks, and was fortunate enough that I could get in on assisting some sessions with them and just observe their tracking setups and observe their mixing setups and try to implement that in my own way. A lot of that time there was spent, as I mentioned, it was a 3 big tracking room facility, and there was mastering upstairs, so all of those rooms weren't booked every day. So if maybe just one of those rooms was booked till 9 or 10 o'clock that night, you had a couple empty studios, and I had nothing to do if I wasn't on those sessions. So I would be just messing around, just experimenting with things. I would be getting files from my friends that were in Pittsburgh that were making records up there. They would be sending stuff down to me. I would be running stuff through Gear to see what it did, see how it reacted. I would be mixing stuff for people. There was a record label in Pittsburgh that had a lot of punk rock bands that they would send a lot of their stuff down to me, and yeah, it was just kind of ironic that these very, very small budget punk records were being mixed in a $2,000 a day room, by definitely not a $2,000 a day engineer. at that point.
Let's just say this. I don't associate Nashville with punk rock in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, you came from that. How did it feel to be in Nashville? Because, that is, it's an ecosystem that is very strong in terms of, record labels and songwriters. And it's a very commercial kind of town from my perspective. I don't know if anybody else would agree with that, but, or if you would agree with that, but how did you feel about musically where you were at with all of that?
Every city, is going to have their pockets and their scene and their punk rock scene and their rock and roll scene. And I tried to find that pretty quick. I was a fan of country music, and I love country music to this day. I was a little bit more influenced by the more traditional stuff, the more traditional outlaw movement or 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s country music, more so than the stuff that was happening at the time when I was there. But I definitely had an appreciation for it. Nashville's bread and butter for the studio scene is, doing not only top 40 country records, but for all the songwriters needing to cut demos. There's 100 songwriters a day or something, moving to Nashville. And their goal is to get, if they want to be a professional songwriter, and sling songs to top 40 country artists, their goal is to get a publishing deal. And the publisher says, you owe us 10 songs a month, and they have to be fully recorded and delivered, and we'll pay for, whatever, half of it or all of it, and we'll give you a draw. And so that's a lot of work if each songwriter's got to record 10 songs a month with a band. Before people had the ability to very easily build tracks themselves, which a lot of them are doing now, but they would have to be with a full live band. And so that's what was keeping all these studios alive.
The musicianship in Nashville, to me, is otherworldly.
Incredible.
Just absolutely mind-blowing how good people are and how efficient they are in studios.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%. The efficiency, you have to be. You've got a songwriter demo session and they need to cut 5 songs in this 3-hour block. They're union blocks. So you've got 3 hours to do 5 songs. What is that? 45 minutes, half hour song? From the time the band hears it, maybe the songwriter plays it down on acoustic guitar and sings it, and everybody takes their notes down, or they have a copy of a chart in front of them and, look around at the end. Any questions? How are we going to end it? Fade? How are we going to end it? Diamond on this thing? Okay, cool. Jot it down, go out. Try it once. Okay, cool. We learned a lot. Try it twice. There you go. That's a track. Fix it up. Put a solo on it. Double the chorus.
Do they just keep the same Pro Tools session up and running, or do they create a new session for every song?
And some people would do it. Everybody would do it different ways. I would always make a new session for each song, because some of them would go. Not all of them would be mixed from the same person. So they would find their way to different folks.
And that efficiency on the musician side and that musical prowess really puts the pressure on you to be, a very efficient and mindful engineer.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you gotta be quick, just like the players have to be super efficient and be able to dial up a sound very quickly and expedite, what needs to happen for this song or this part of the song. Engineers got to be ready and not holding everybody back, so you got to be quick, not only in Pro Tools, but, making sure everybody's headphone balances. This would be, the band would be, drummer, bass player, acoustic guitar player, 1 electric, maybe 2 electrics, steel, and a keyboard player, maybe even a fiddle player if it's a particularly country songwriter. So that's a lot of people to manage and a lot of headphone stuff to manage. So it's got to all be worked out before they walk in. Preparation was the biggest part of the gig.
That probably kicked your ass.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. I mean, it was, we would do, man, that studio was busy. You know, we would do triples. And by the time I got to a point where I was maybe assisting on gigs and then starting to do my own gigs as an engineer, and then there was a little bit of an area where I was engineering sometimes, and then I was assisting other times. So I would be there, you know, all day, maybe engineering, and then I would be assisting the next day. So I'd have to turn the room around or go to another room and set that up for a couple hours, and then be there all day the next day, just in the other chair, you know. So it was a lot. It was a lot of work, but it was a great education on how to expedite things, how long something could take and should take to get a tambourine pass or to get, you know, this or that. And you just kind of pick up things that, oh, okay, cool. If you always have like kind of this percussion mic that's off here to the side, all you got to do is, okay, cool. We've got our track. The acoustic player is going to double. He's going to go down on tambourine. Let me just open up this tambourine channel for this perc mic. Y'all will go down at the same time. And that's, you know, you're just expediting. So it's a lot of camaraderie, within the musicians and in between the musicians and engineers, and it's just so much fun too, you know, to work that fast and to work like the music was almost secondary, you know. It's like it doesn't even matter what we're cutting. To me, you know, it was all kind of white noise, you know. Occasionally you got stuff that was like, oh, this is really great, and I feel something, but a lot of times you're just so caught up in facilitating what needs to be done on the recording side that you're the song, the vocal is going right past you, and you're so keyed into the details. I equate it to like one of those magic eye paintings, you know, where you look real close and it's just super blurry. You're real zoomed into it, but then you take a step back and you can see the sailboat.
Right.
Every now and then.
I like that.
You could see the sailboat and appreciate, man, this is a great song. This is a great, you know, performance, or this is a great whatever from this singer.
Were headphone mixes primarily dealt with like little personal mixers, or were you in charge of like literally managing everybody's independent headphone mix?
Most of the facilities would have, you know, a multi-channel mixer, you know, at least 8 Mormies. But the way that I always like to do it and still like to do it is just provide a mix, so that if somebody sits down, they don't want to muck with it. All they got to do is turn this mix fader up, and you've got a stereo mix that should represent what I'm hearing in the control room. And then you have Mormies if you need more vocal, if you need more bass, what be it, you can add to it. But I like to just provide as close as I can to what the finished product is going to be on this fader. And so in doing that, it's either, you know, you can build it from, you know, effects end or on your console, or you can just send the output of the disc, you know, here's exactly what I'm hearing.
So you were there more than a decade.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I still work there from time to time. But yeah, you know, I came up through that studio, and people came to the studio for the studio at first. And then after a while, what happens if you're fortunate enough for it to happen, people stop calling the studio to see if the studio's available next Tuesday. They call you to see if you're available next Tuesday. And then they say, where do you want to work? And then a lot of times, you know, just this was my home base, I would say, let's continue to do it here, you know. And then, but as you get a little bit more adventurous, or, you know, you kind of want to just start getting yourself into some different camps, you would just say, well, let's try it over here. Let's try to do something over here.
Were there any politics to navigate in terms of like, you know, here's a client who may originally call the front desk to book time at the studio, but then they're calling you directly,
mm-hmm.
and you may propose to go elsewhere. Is there any kind of non-compete agreement there, or, you know, is there anything to navigate from a work relationship basis?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, a little bit, but there's a lot of work going on. You know, studios are like, they're at the time, you know, they weren't having any trouble booking them. So it's like, oh, okay, well, if it's not this session, it's another one's going to fall into place, you know. So there was just a lot of work going on in the studio world at that time, and so yeah, there wasn't too much of a, you know, kind of compete thing. And studios would place things too. They, you know, it was such a tight knit community that like the studio manager would get a call and they would say, "Oh man, you know, I'm so sorry, all of our rooms are booked up that date that you wanted. Let me call Juanita over at Sound Emporium and see if they have something for you, and they'll place you over here." And you know, the Sound Emporium would do the same thing for us, you know. So it was like a there was a camaraderie within studios too, you know, placing stuff and making sure everybody was happy and fed and paid, and you know, like, hey, this client maybe didn't pay the bill last time. I'm gonna give a heads up to these other couple studios in town. Just FYI, might want to get paid up front for this one.
Let's look at the up and comer. Maybe they're not going to a recording school. Maybe they're just thinking, hey, I'd like to go to Nashville. I'd like to get in and start where you started. Are there any do's and don'ts that you could recommend to the up and comer?
I would say try to find a place with a bit more of a lenient internship date range. You know, it's tough to get something done if somebody offers you a 2-month internship. You know, because you're 2 months in, you're just going to start feeling comfy. You're just going to start getting your know of the place, and then boom, your time's up and you're out the door. And now you don't have that. You know, if your in was I'm receiving school credit, you basically have your pick of the lot of where you can go. But if you don't have that card, receiving school credit, then you're kind of out of luck, and you got to start at other places, or you got to start at, you know, mom and pop shops or whatever, which is awesome too, and can be a great route. But if you're trying to do come up through the commercial studio scene, try to find a place that you feel like maybe you can linger a little bit longer than a proposed date range. Yeah, just maybe a place that doesn't have a super huge turnaround for their interns, you know.
Let's talk a little bit about your adventure into, you know, having the space that you have now and moving to Ashland City.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, had you been living in Nashville?
Yeah, I was in Nashville proper. And Nashville's not super big, you know. It used to. It could take 15 or 20 minutes to get from one whole side of the city to the other, you know. And Ashland City's not too far. It's, you know, a half hour outside of town, which is like the traffic in Nashville, you know, to get, you know, 7 miles could be a half hour at a certain point of the day. So I don't consider myself too far out or any further out than anybody else that still lives in town.
What's, like, if we're trying to orient ourselves a bit,
Mm-hmm.
we have Nashville. I know where Franklin is. Where is Ashland City in comparison to, you know, to triangulate, if we could, between Franklin and Nashville?
So Franklin is pretty much directly south of Nashville, and Ashland City is northwest.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you're looking at Nashville, it's kind of up and to the left out here, and there's kind of just it's a pretty rural area, a lot of space out here, a lot of farmland. It's kind of I live in like right along the Cumberland River. It's a little kind of river town. There's a marina, and you know, it's nice. It's nice.
Well, so tell me about the decision to move out there, and how does that affect your workload? I'm assuming you obviously you're still working. That's why you're on this show. But, you know, tell me about how that changed the landscape for you, pros and cons.
Well, I was so fortunate that my partner pushed me into building this place. This is a converted garage. This used to be the back 2 stalls of the garage in my home, and we just kind of cut the garage in half and closed it off, and, you know, did some insulation and altered the ceiling heights and all this stuff. But she really pushed me to get it done, and this was 20 19, I think. So just in the nick of time, she pushed me to start to get this place together. Now that we're out here and we are a little bit further from town, I was going into town to do any work, any mix work. I was kind of moonlighting in a studio, or I would mix here, I would mix there, and it was just, it was getting to be a lot. Was having a lot on my plate, and to do a vocal up on a mix, I would have to drive a half hour into town and drive a half hour back, and it just becomes, not super fun. So building this place has been, saving grace. For now I can mix all day, and if I want to go out on a bike ride at 1 o'clock, I can go out on a bike ride at 1 o'clock. If I need to go walk the dog or go out and have lunch, I can do that. I can have folks out here to do, smaller scale recording stuff. It's been really great.
Do you find that you're at a disadvantage at all being outside of Nashville?
There is something to kind of out of sight, out of mind. I spent the first 10 years of my time here trying to be in the hallway all the time. Like literally, I want to be seen. I want people to know that I'm here, and in a way that this person can be of help to me, and this person is going to make me look good if they're in the room. So I was always trying to be around. If you're trying to make your way in a specific scene, it's good to be close by and to hang around the water coolers, so to speak. After a certain amount of time, I kind of fell into a little bit less of a random client list. Maybe I was working for 4 or 5 producer teams that were maybe 80% of my work, and they know where I'm at. They don't need to see me in the hallway to know that I'm still around and available. I'm kind of just still in their mind, hopefully. At the time when we moved out here, it wasn't a super big concern, being out of sight, because I still was doing tracking sessions all the time, 4 or 5 times a week in town. I was still being seen a lot.
Can you talk a bit about the business of being an audio professional in Nashville and things that people need to keep in mind, or lessons that you have learned? Everything from whether you're being the assistant or the first engineer and you're billing, whether you're billing hourly or whether you're producing somebody, like, how do you navigate the financial landscape? Is there a particular etiquette or protocols that people stick to in Nashville when it comes to handling money and billing and all that?
Maybe not a particular protocol, so to speak. People do things differently. Engineers are not a part of the union anymore. From what I understand, they were at one time. So they're just completely independent, and it's kind of, you pick up on things that other engineers are doing, or maybe your seniors are, okay, this is how they're billing for a project, so I'm going to make sure I'm not billing more than they are. Yeah, I'm not doing anything that's going to kind of disrupt the ecosystem of the people that are hiring me. There is a certain, understanding that, like, hey, when you're first starting out, this is kind of the rate for an assistant engineer, and this is what all the publishing companies are expecting to pay and are paying, and so it's tough to stray too far from that. So yeah, there are things that you pick up from people coming up about what to do and what not to do, but for the most part, it's kind of the Wild West, and you're your own boss. If you price yourself too high, you might just price yourself out of a gig.
How does one even find that out? Do you just have to have these like private conversations with other engineers saying, what do I charge?
Yeah, totally. Again, Nashville is such like a kind of small town feel, where in tight-knit community in the studio world and in the engineering world, and everybody's trying to help each other out. There are just favors that you can do for younger folks, that like, hey, I'd like you to assist me on this gig. This is the normal amount that they would pay. So bill whatever you want. That's on you. But FYI, here's where they typically expect, something to come in at, and where they have to be able to make it work. that's not disclosing what you're making, so to speak. It's just, hey, heads up, here's what I would do if I was you.
Interesting. Did you make any early mistakes when you first got there?
Yeah, I'm sure I made a ton. Conveniently, none of them are coming to mind. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure as far as billing stuff, I'm sure along the way I've billed way too much because I had a particular taste in my mouth about a particular session maybe, or like I was there super, super late or whatever, and maybe they weren't expecting to pay this much, and I billed too much, and we were kind of at a standoff, and I never got a call from them again because they went with maybe somebody who's not going to contest it as much, or, you know, whatever. There's just a bit of a dance that has to come with it where you're valuing yourself, and you're not just trying to be the cheapest person around. That's another thing that I try to stress to younger engineers is like, don't be the person that is going to be the lowball person. That, because you might get work by having that method, but it's not going to be quality work. You're going to attract the type of people that are looking for looking for not the quality, but they're looking for the cheapest thing possible. And if that's the world that you want to live in, hey, I know some folks that live by that motto, you know. But can we curse on this podcast?
Of course.
Don't fuck it up for the rest of us and bill half the rate that they're used to seeing, the label or the publishing company is used to seeing, because now they're expecting that. That's the new bar. Is they're like, oh, well, this person does it for this person does it for this. So don't mess it up for the rest of us. Let's keep, let's keep our standards higher, and let's work together on trying to maintain, like a quality of living. And hey, maybe even once every 10 years, we can give ourselves a little raise.
So you don't want to build too much, and you don't want to build too little.
Yeah.
It's going to be just right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I guess it can be tough, but there's no shame in asking, the engineer that's in charge of your session, if you're assisting, like, hey, what do I bill for this? What's comfy? What am I going to get kickback for? Or, what do you think this is worth? And they'll decide, if you tell them, here's the number, and they're like, I can make more bartending, then go ahead.
Yeah.
Maybe this isn't for you. If it's not worth living at this pay level for a certain amount of time so that you can work your way up, it's kind of, I don't know, maybe that's an old school way of thinking about it, but that was my experience.
Have there ever been any situations where labels, publishers, whoever is paying the bill just didn't pay your bill?
100%. Dozens of times throughout the years. And it's just, there's stuff that, you just, it's more effort to fight with somebody 5 or 6 times on an email, than it is to just like, all right, that was a day in my life, and there it goes, But hey, you learned something about it. You learned to not work with that person anymore. That's the biggest thing that you learned. And maybe you picked up on something on the session that you didn't know. It's more experience. So you got paid. If it wasn't monetarily, you still got paid for doing that work.
Situations have come up where people haven't paid the bill. You've identified who those people are, and then you cut them off and no longer do any work for them.
Sure. I mean, it's like in any field, you do some contract labor for somebody, and they don't pay you, or they are a bad client, and whatever that means to you, if that means they're kind of just raking you over the coals, about the work, or wanting just a little bit extra, stay a little bit longer than everybody else wants you to stay, or just they kind of wear you out, and you kind of build up a bit of a mental Rolodex of these types, and you can spot them from a mile away after a certain amount of time. And it's like, I don't think I want to be involved.
And do you think that the audio community in Nashville shares that information willingly with one another?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because it's, who wants to work for a jerk, or somebody that doesn't pay? I certainly don't. I'm happy to pass off my experience to somebody else, an acquaintance, an engineer that's asking, you might get a phone call like, hey, I got a strange call from this type of person, and it seems like it's, like maybe too good to be true for the rate that they're offering and the workload. Like, have you worked for this person before? And it's like, oh yeah, stay away from that. They'll do this and they're going to expect this, this, and this for you. And it ends up being twice the amount of work that you initially signed on for. Or it could go the other way. And like, no, it really is great. And they're on your side and they're super appreciative of your time and talents. And they just want to make sure that you're taken care of.
I'm told that whether or not you're a player or an engineer, that it's such a tight-knit community that newcomers are not exactly, I don't want to say that they're unwelcome, but that they're looked at with a little bit of caution at first, or that I think that there's a joke. It's like, people say, oh, you're living here now. Yeah. What church do you belong to? Because that's an indicator of like you settling into the community or something.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
right?
Completely off base from your experience?
No, I think it's very cliquey, the certain scenes, and the reason that I can, kind of understand why it's so cliquey is because it's a town its recording foundation is based on expediency and being able to do the most amount of work in the least amount of time, because that's what pleases the people that are cutting the checks. So as long as that work keeps flowing, as long as you keep providing that level of expediency, you can get 5 songs in a demo session. I can deliver this much. I can deliver this much. I can, as a drummer, I can handle playing 5 songs very well in a very short amount of time. But you get a new, you're putting the band together, and you got a buddy who's fresh into town, and he's a great drummer, but he may not be used to this world where there's this, fast-paced thing that's having to happen, and you hire him for a session or her for a session, and they maybe don't cut it. You only get 3 songs because they're having trouble keeping up, and like, what are we doing on the bridge again? I need another take. I need another take. And now all of a sudden that comes back on me if I put the band together. That comes back on the band leader if they put the band together. So the publisher, maybe they don't hire this guy the next time because you put us behind. And I hate to, kind of like break it down to be that like cruel or like soul sucking, because it's not all that way in that world. But a lot of times, yeah, you really got to vouch for somebody, and you really got to be confident that they can perform at a certain level before you can recommend them or bring them into this circle. So yes, the turnover rate is rather slow because you're waiting for opportunities where like, okay, this is a super lax session. Maybe we only have to do 3 songs in 3 hours, So I can, okay, who have I been wanting to bring in and kind of prove themselves? And okay, great, get their feet wet with this type of thing. So yeah, Nashville can be very cliquey in those worlds where, super fast and expedient things are what's required. But that's not all of Nashville.
Yeah, and I assume the same applies to engineers as
Sure.
well. And
Yeah.
obviously country is the dominant genre in Nashville, but like I see a lot of rock people moving there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious if you have any perspective on, are there any hip hop, situations there? Is there any like jazz there?
Yeah, 100%. There's everything here. Just like any city, you can find little pockets of scenes for across most genres. The studio scene, just because the bread and butter of kind of the Nashville recording community is maybe top 40 country or these songwriter publishing demos, at least at one time. But so that is the kind of the majority, of the work is in that world. But there's a ton of people and clients that are seeking that type of expediency, and they're not going to LA to cut their rock band jingle anymore. They're coming to Nashville because these guys and girls can kill it in half the amount of time, and they're going to do it live on the floor. So it's going to take, a half hour to get this thing done, as opposed to maybe it would take much longer somewhere else to do it, just because the bar may or may not be set quite as high. So yeah, I would say there are definitely pockets of different players and studios and engineers that they kill the rock thing, or they kill this traditional country thing, or they kill, like, if you have something jazzy, it's like this person. But for the most part, if you're a good musician, to me, you should be able to, be worth your weight in a lot of these chairs, and a lot of folks are. You see them across all different types of sessions.
Are you ever tempted to leave the area and try another place to live and work?
I wouldn't be opposed to, in the distant future, getting somewhere that's even more remote, and then just going, and having my mixed world there, and then just traveling to do records at a time, where you're fortunate enough to, maybe we're doing 2 weeks here, or maybe we're doing 2 weeks there, or, but if you want them to come to you in that remote place, that's you got to have a pretty loyal client base, or you got to have a pretty big name to be able to do that. And I don't think I'm quite at that point yet where I could make it out to Alaska and still get still get clients.
Yeah, come out to my place in Alaska. We'll make a great record.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any kids? No kids. Okay.
No kids. Just myself and my partner, who also plays music and releases records under her name, and so it's a very musical household, and we're kept very busy with things.
That's awesome, man. Great to talk to you. Great to get such insight from yet another perspective on Nashville.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends in Nashville. I've been in Nashville, and every time I talk to somebody who is living there, I'm always enlightened a bit about what's happening there and how it works.
Yeah, it's an interesting ecosystem, and I've got to say, I'm not 100% in the hustle and bustle of the Music Row thing as much as I was coming up. Fortunately, I have kind of fallen into some camps where, there's extended times to make records, and we're getting a little bit away from the throw and go 3-song 3-hour block type thing, and it's mostly just, we're working on music today, and the day is we don't have a clock, so to speak. So fortunately, I've my days tracking, the past couple years anyways, have been a little bit more lax and a little bit out of the hustle and bustle, but the hustle and bustle of the super expedited union block sessions definitely made me a better engineer, and made me just much quicker and much better of a record maker.
I bet. Well, fantastic to talk to you. Appreciate you coming on the show and making time for us. And hopefully we'll meet in person in the future.
I hope so too.
All right, man. Well, you take care, and thanks again.
Thank you.